Newsline with Faraz, Shauketaly.
And a jolly good morning to you. This is Newsline, live as always from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And this morning, the 23rd of February, Friday, we have with us a person, a gentleman, who's agreed to come and discuss transparency in Sri Lanka. And that very person is Dr. Asoka Obeysekere. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, Faraz.
Thank you very much for being here. So
I just say that I haven't done enough work to earn a doctorate.
Oh, I'm so sorry. We feel that you are a doctor, but you are working at it.
No PhD. I don't think.
Not on the horizon?
Not even on the horizon.
Oh dear! But what is on the horizon? What about this good governance business?
Well, that is, I'm guessing, a continuous work in progress, as you will know better than I, Faraz.
Right. Now, honestly, is it? What is? You've put out a new. There's a new. The latest report is out.
Yeah. So
tell us about that.
Yeah. Annually, as many may know, there's something called the Corruption Perceptions Index.
Right.
That is one of the main things that Transparency International globally produces.
Right.
And the main interest in the Corruption Perception Index is that it allows people to say that this country is supposed to be the least corrupt, this country is supposed to be the most corrupt. That's how typically it is discussed. But what it actually is it is the perception of public sector corruption.
Oh, I see.
And so last year, there's a score out of 100, with 100 being the best situation and 0 being the worst situation. And Sri Lanka had scored 36 out of 100 last year, which was a marginal decline from the previous year of 1 point.
Right.
And this year it has gone up by 2 points to 38 out of 100.
Right.
Generally, when we're looking at scores of the Corruption Perception Index, any change of 6 points or more is considered a significant change.
Oh, okay.
And so what is clear is that Sri Lanka, looking back over the years, has really shown no significant change
over the last 6 years.
Yeah, I mean, from 2012 onwards, it's remained static.
What was it in 2011?
So, I can tell you that in 2014, it was exactly the same as what it is today.
Oh, I see.
So it was also at 38 points. So we basically hover around the same area, and have not shown any significant change. And I think when a viewer thinks about it, it's actually it makes sense. I mean, when we think about the fact that, let's say, an ordinary citizen, the way in which an ordinary citizen encounters corruption, be it petty bribery with police, be it the significant sums which are paid, let's say, to secure one's child into school.
Right.
All of those things
they all add up.
They all add up, and importantly, they all remain more or less unchanged.
Right.
You know, so whilst we have continuous discussions around issues of grand corruption and the fact that even things on those areas don't change, but also just at a very sort of normal citizen level, the perceptions of corruption haven't changed, and the Corruption Perception Index score also hasn't changed. So it illustrates that there is sort of things are stagnant.
I see. Just to put it in perspective, which of the countries has got 100?
So this year, no country has 100, but the highest score is New Zealand with 89 points and Denmark with 87 points.
So does that mean that both Denmark and New Zealand have had their own share of sort of corruption scandals that would impinge on this ability to get 100?
It's also methodologically, this computes from 13 different indexes.
Right.
The Economist Intelligence Unit Index, the Bertelsmann Index, amongst others.
Right.
So what it illustrates is that, yes, I mean, no country is perfect.
Right.
And that may be sometimes down to implementation. That may be sometimes down to the fact that maybe the institutional framework isn't sufficiently strong enough, let's say, to discourage foreign bribery by other companies, let's say, within that country. There could be a whole host of reasons, but no country has scored above 90 this year. One thing which is of some interest is the fact that in South Asia, looking at SAARC, and the 8 countries in SAARC, the leader by a country mile is Bhutan,
Right.
with a score of 67.
Right.
In second place is India with a score of 40, then us at 38. And then Bangladesh, Pakistan, the Maldives
But Bhutan,
follow.
Bhutan, don't they have something called a happiness index?
Indeed, indeed. And I think, I mean, it is, I mean, I'm speculating here, but I think part of the reason why Bhutan also has positive results like this is also illustrative of the fact that Bhutan, until very recently, has been arguably one of the most closed countries to the rest of the world. And only now are they slowly opening out their economy. So this, I guess also in a way like, capitalist motivations and corruption that may sometimes emanate from that isn't something that has captured Bhutan
So
yet.
you're saying that corruption is a sort of a very capitalistic thing?
It doesn't necessarily need to be, but I've got a feeling when it comes to Bhutan, that may be one of the factors for Bhutan, purely because it has the unique features of being a very, very closed economy, and also it until very recently was one of the only absolute monarchies where and needless to say, there, in an absolute monarchy, if approached in the right spirit, things like corruption could be sort of curtailed, whilst other democratic values may not necessarily be so. Yeah,
I see. Where does the United States feature in all this?
Actually, I can maybe during our commercial break, I can quickly check where the US is on.
Now then, tell me, are matters like what you called, I think you said, grand corruption, the sort of, for want of a better word, flagship matters, like, we've had contentious issues here, like, say, the bond matter, the highways, all big ticket items. How much would they, let's say that we didn't have the bond scam, for example, let's say it never happened. What would it have? How much would that have impacted on the corruption index?
It's difficult to put a number on it, purely because this is pulling from 13 different indexes of expert and business people's opinions on public sector corruption. That said, though, what's important to sort of flag up here is that, especially when it comes to the way in which foreign direct investment views Sri Lanka, in some countries there are issues such as listing issues if a country engages in foreign bribery, for instance. Now, the fact that, and I can only speculate, I can't say if the bond scam never occurred, how things would move, but maybe I'm sure the perceptions of public sector corruption would have been impacted by it. And especially when we look at the movement of FDI, many investors look at things like the Corruption Perceptions Index to understand whether, if you make an investment, is the need for public sector bribery and corruption an essential factor. And in countries where they're looking at how they can invest overseas, and if they have listing requirements which say that if you engage in foreign bribery, there are significant consequences at home, maybe FDI would be discouraged from approaching a market such as ours, potentially.
I see. And with the foreign investment, obviously, when the government here in Sri Lanka sort of embarked on this expropriation bill and took back some businesses and so on, that would have a negative impact, surely.
That certainly would. I mean, that would certainly impact the decision-making of investors.
Yeah.
And I mean, anecdotally, as I'm sure you would also know, I mean, I have heard of many investors at the time of the expropriation bill,
yeah,
which is now, what, maybe must be a little more than 4 years ago.
Indeed.
Now. That would discourage people. Whether that impacts the corruption perception index and the perception of public sector corruption may not necessarily be so, but I mean, it certainly would have had an impact on business confidence, probably on like a doing business index as well. The fact that those sorts of things occurred, I'm sure it would have had some impact elsewhere.
How do you detect, or what level of concern do you detect on the part of our legislators when they have such systems like the corruption perception index?
Well, I mean, we saw last year many people using the corruption perception index to highlight the fact that corruption in Sri Lanka is no different to what it was before. And many members of parliament were publicly highlighting this. I've got a feeling that this year there will be a slightly smaller number, purely because we have shown a marginal increase in our point score.
Right.
That said, though, it's nowhere near warranting being sort of treated like a significant change.
It doesn't help, these figures don't help, let's say, in a scenario where the BOI is doing a roadshow, or the SEC is doing a roadshow, or the CSE, to drum up support and investment.
Indeed. I mean, it certainly wouldn't be possible to say that Sri Lanka is an easier country to invest in because we are tackling corruption, because the data doesn't illustrate that we are tackling corruption in any significant way.
I see.
So I would agree with your statement. I mean, it's not a tool that can be used to promote the country for external investment.
Yes. I can hardly imagine Dr. Kumaraswamy traveling around the world and saying, come to this tiny paradise where we are so good at it that you can make exceptional returns. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
On that note, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back on the other side of this message.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
Welcome back to Newsline. Dr. Asoka Obeysekere. Now then, we've got a message, we've got a question from a viewer. Do you think that deregulation, as far as practicable, would go a long way towards minimizing corruption?
Well, on one side of things, obviously, the more bureaucratic something is, the more opportunities there are for gatekeepers. So I can see that the viewer may have there may be something there. That said, even when there is deregulation, I mean, still there have to be quite frequently still, even if you roll back a lot of the red tape, very often there is still state approval on certain things. Maybe the amount of red tape will reduce, but whether state approval of certain things will fundamentally disappear, there's a question mark there. And it's at times like that that the abuse of public power for private gain can take place. So it's purely deregulating without any sort of proper accountability mechanism instead in its place won't, in my opinion, address corruption completely.
Then what about the local government elections recently concluded? Now, after all the palaver and the shouting and so on, and things have settled down, and with the daylight shining on matters, we have the spectre of various councils having a sort of a hung council.
Yeah.
How does one address that then?
So the one thing was that the press immediately after the local government elections, I mean, they really highlighted the fact that Port Tour had done fantastically well, and the fact that they had won 222 councils.
Yeah.
I think the one thing which is slightly misleading there is that they were calling a victory for different parties based on whether they had the largest number of seats.
Right.
But the way in which these things function and the way control works is that it is about where majorities come from.
Right.
And when we were crunching the numbers, we realized that there were more than 160 of the 341 local government authorities which are hung authorities, i.e. no individual party with the majority.
Right.
And so I was then digging through the local government elections ordinance to actually understand, I mean, how does a mayor or deputy mayor or a chairman of a Pradeshia Sabha, I mean, how are they elected? And section 66C of the local government elections ordinance states that where there is less than 50, where no party has got over 50%, at the first meeting of that council, there has to be a vote within the council of who is to be mayor and deputy mayor.
Right.
So now, maybe 2 or 3 people are put forward.
Right.
And it's through a simple majority system that you finally select someone.
Right.
So what that means is that arguably, if party number 2 and number 3 in a particular council club together, they can get them, their mayor and deputy mayor elected ahead of the party that has the most number of councillors.
Right.
So what's interesting right now is that across the country, it is a ripe time for deal making.
Yes.
And so it's arguably, given the nature of things, the SLF peers probably have a closer affinity to the Port Tour members than to UMP members. But I mean, given the fact that there is a coalition between SLFP and UMP in central government, it will be very interesting to see how how deals are struck in the over 160 authorities across the country which are hung.
So that's a huge potential for disaster, actually.
Well, I mean, it is potential for malpractice.
Yes.
And so, you know, the idea, I mean, when we have witnessed or allegedly witnessed allegations of members of parliament moving from one side to another for sums of money, it is the possibility of that happening at local government level is potentially possible at local government level, not necessarily to cross, but in the way in which they provide support for mayors and deputy mayors.
But
and like.
when we look at the voting pattern, and you know, when we think that the change that came about in January 2015 was based on claims from one side that corruption was really endemic and so on. And then when you look at the results of the local government polls, do you think that the people actually care about corruption? Is it one of those things that is up there, or you know, have the people of Sri Lanka grown blasé about it?
I mean, you know, my view on the sort of election results is that Firstly, I mean, former President Rajapaksa has illustrated that he is still, by a country mile, the most popular individual politician in the country.
Yeah.
However, I mean, looking at vote share and other things, I mean, the election results on this occasion and the election results of the January 2015 presidential election are not entirely dissimilar. The only difference is that those who try to oppose President Rajapaksa, they had a sense of self-confidence that they could show some results on their own. And what this illustrates is that the only way that they can show any strength is in unity amongst themselves. So when we look at the vote shares and we add together President Rajapaksa's vote share and the vote share of those opposed to him, they are more or less the same as last time round. So to say that there's a shift away from anti-corruption, I wouldn't say that the public is disinterested in anti-corruption. Potentially, the public has lost faith, maybe, in anti-corruption. Therefore, hence why President Rajapaksa's showing at this local government election reflects his showing at the last presidential election. I mean, his vote share may have come down marginally, but you know, I think there's still very much currency in anti-corruption, and I'm sure that there would be a dividend for anyone who was willing to properly tackle it. The issue is that where do the legislators of our country, where do their priorities lie? Is it in ensuring, I mean, they know that to meet the public demand, there will need to be very public, high-level elected officials who will need to arguably be burnt to illustrate that this system is fair. And I think no one still believes that this system is fair and goes after people impartially.
But Asoka, the level of corruption, the departure from due process and established process is absolutely shocking, because when we look at our Sri Lanka's sort of national procurement, if you like, every single matter of any substance has been tainted by claim of some form of corruption. You know, we have bonds, which is of course the largest regular procurement undertaken by the country is the raising of funds. So we had the bond thing there. Then we had the Central Expressway, where, you know, one company is brought in, and that whole process is, they can't really stand up, hand on the heart, and say this is not controversial. The list is going on. You know, the procurement of coal for the power stations, and you know, the awarding of other road contracts, the supply of fuel. All major big-ticket items, Sri Lankan Airlines, you know, good money being thrown after bad, and so on. And so there's no professionalism, and so the people almost expect, or they know, that corruption is hand in hand with democracy.
Yeah, and I think this is, I guess, the challenge, because the way in which we also tackle corruption, it allows anything to be tainted.
Right.
You know, and so we have to also think about ways in which we can show that there's legitimacy in a process. Because I think there are times when there are legitimate processes, but also people who do not benefit from them also say, well, this was corruption.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is that because we can't discern one way or the other easily, everything gets, you know, there is a sense that everything gets tainted. So I mean, we then need to look at how we can address that. And a part of the reasons may even be addressed through the upcoming 2018 revised procurement guidelines. It's the first revision in procurement guidelines for 12 years.
Yeah.
And that will hopefully, if it remains unchanged, it will ensure that tenders will be publicly accessible online, as an example. But I'll give you another example. Let's say even on issues of conflict of interest. There are many people, I mean, who actually are in the public service and they do their job honorably. But the nature also sometimes of society, as we all know, is that there are so many interlinkages between different things. So there also should be interest registers where people can actually proactively disclose their interests to say that, you know, my sister is married to XYZ, so that interest can be disclosed, so that people don't always assume there is corruption at every single juncture.
I think that also should apply to the judiciary and so on as well, because obviously everything is very important. I mean, I don't want to have to go to the Supreme Court and find that there is some tainting there, because my entire lifestyle, my livelihood may well depend on those people, those very honourable men and women who make up the bench of the Supreme Court, for example.
Indeed. And so this is the thing. I mean, being able to disclose interests is not a way of, you know, we're always talking about how do we catch the wrongdoer. But actually, it's also about being able to create an environment where we encourage others to actually get involved.
And how last question, because we're running out of time, how's your efforts been to get hold of the assets and liabilities, but in a way that we can discuss it and publish it?
Well, I think we will be very, very soon hearing sort of a preliminary decision of the Right to Information Commission. I must say the Right to Information Commission up till now has been very progressive. The Sri Lanka Press Institute had done a study which illustrated that 88% of their decisions were about supporting the disclosure of information. Obviously, our issue is a very sensitive one on asset disclosure. So I mean, irrespective, we will still keep pursuing it because the law clearly accommodates it, in our opinion. There are these sorts of technicalities it's more of a technical issue right now, but you know, it's I'll be sure to keep you posted on that.
Oh, please do. We would like to see how well or not these gundus are impacting on our ability to look at this information. Asoka, Obeysekere, thank you very much for being on Newsline.
With pleasure.
And we look forward to having you again. And that's the way it was on Friday, the 23rd of February 2018. Take care and God bless.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.